of a stunner, right? This was Friday night. The prosecutors argued for no mitigating factors.
Go to start right now. Good evening, Rachel.
Good evening, Chris. Thanks, my friend. Much appreciated.
You bet.
And thanks to you at home for joining us this hour. Happy Monday. Happy President's Day. On Friday night, you may recall, we got the sentencing submission from special counsel Robert Mueller for Trump campaign chairman Paul Manafort. And it was kind of a stunner, right? This was Friday night. The prosecutors argued for no mitigating factors to be more lenient with Manafort, and they argued for lots of aggravating factors that should cause the judge to be harsher in sentencing Manafort. Mueller's prosecutors advised that judge on Friday night in Manafort's case in Virginia that they would not object to a 19.5-year to 24.5-year prison sentence for Paul Manafort, plus fines and restitution that ranged from millions of dollars to tens of millions of dollars. Now, keep in mind, though, that sentencing recommendation Friday night was just for the one judge who's hearing the Paul Manafort case in Virginia. That is not the only federal case against Paul Manafort. By the end of this week, we're expecting Robert Mueller and his prosecutors to also make their case for the sentence that they believe Manafort should get from the other federal judge who is hearing the other federal criminal case against Paul Manafort in the neighboring jurisdiction of Washington, D.C. And that fairly dire circumstance, the fact that 69.5-year-old Paul Manafort is now looking down the twin barrels of a sentence from this federal judge in Virginia and then another sentence from this federal judge in D.C., that honestly is a crisis of his own making, because it was Manafort and his defense team who elected to not combine the two sets of felony charges against him into one single case in one jurisdiction before one judge. So Manafort is now facing sentencing in two different jurisdictions by two different federal judges on two different sets of crimes. And yes, he does face the prospect that the sentences in each of those jurisdictions might run consecutively, might run one after the other, rather than concurrently, both at the same time. So we know as of Friday night what prosecutors have advised the judge in the Virginia case, 19.5 to 24.5 years in prison. That came out on Friday. By the end of this week, we'll see what the prosecutors are advising the other judge in his other case. And then it will be up to those two judges in each of those jurisdictions to decide Paul Manafort's fate. And the second judge, the one in D.C., who will get prosecutor sentencing submission this week, within the next few days, she is the judge who has already ruled against Paul Manafort in some very materially significant ways. On Friday night, you might remember, we also got the unsealed transcript of the hearing in which that judge ruled that Manafort had repeatedly and intentionally lied to prosecutors, even after he pled guilty and agreed that he would become a cooperator. In that ruling, that judge in D.C. was blunt and direct about Manafort's lies, her ruling that his lies had been intentional, and what she described as the implications of his lies. And you should keep in mind, this isn't just what this judge said in a written ruling about the president's campaign chairman. This is what she said to his face in a court hearing where Manafort himself was present and in the room. She said, quote, "My concern is not with non-answers or simply denials from Manafort, but the times he affirmatively advanced a detailed alternative story that was inconsistent with the facts. Quote, the record doesn't seem to reflect the confusion, and the defendant didn't profess to be confused. He does appear, however, to be making a concerted effort to avoid saying what really took place." On the issue of Konstantin Kilimnik, is this guy who worked with Manafort and who prosecutors say is believed by the FBI to be linked to Russian intelligence. The judge said this about Manafort and Kilimnik, quote, "We've now spent considerable time talking about multiple clusters of false or misleading or incomplete or needed to be prodded by counsel statements, all of which center around the defendant's relationship or communications with Mr. Kilimnik." She says, quote, "This is a topic at the undisputed core of the special counsel's investigation into any links or coordination between the Russian government and individuals associated with the Trump campaign." In terms of the way Paul Manafort lied about his interactions with this guy, Konstantin Kilimnik, the judge says, quote, I think it's also fair to say that advancing that version of events was not just relaying what Kilimnik had said, it appears to be an attempt to exonerate him. This is a problematic attempt to shield his Russian conspirator from liability, and it gives rise to legitimate questions about where Mr. Manafort's loyalties lie. So that's the judge. That's the federal judge in D.C. who revoked Paul Manafort's bail and ordered him to await trial in jail instead of at home when prosecutors brought her evidence and ultimately brought her new federal charges, which said that Manafort had engaged in witness tampering while he was out on bail. This is also the same judge who has been assigned to the GRU case, the early case in which Mueller and his prosecutors charged a dozen Russian military intelligence officers with multiple felonies for their alleged work on the Russian government's influence operation to mess with our election in 2016 to benefit Donald Trump. Now, Mueller's office subsequently told the court that that GRU indictment, it's technically related to the more recent indictment brought against President Trump's longtime advisor, Roger Stone. And because prosecutors have linked the Roger Stone case and that GRU case, the same judge handling the GRU case, which is the same judge who's about to sentence Paul Manafort in D.C., which is the same judge who revoked Paul Manafort's bail, which is the same judge who just ruled that Paul Manafort deliberately lied to prosecutors, that is the same judge. It's all the same judge who's now going to hear the Roger Stone case when he ultimately goes up on trial. And on Friday, it made a little bit of news when that judge, Judge Amy Berman Jackson in D.C., she rejected Roger Stone's argument in which he said his case shouldn't be linked to that GRU Russian military intelligence case. That's what he had argued to her courtroom. Prosecutors provided the judge with evidence that the GRU case and the Roger Stone case are in fact linked. The judge agreed with prosecutors on that, so Roger Stone lost that argument with the judge. That same day, on Friday, that same judge also placed a gag order on Roger Stone and his lawyers, restricting their public statements about the Stone case so as to avoid tainting any potential jury pool for Roger Stone's trial. This was a limited gag order. It was less restrictive than you might have expected in a case like this with a defendant like this. Mr. Stone, for example, while he is out on bond awaiting trial, he is blocked by this limited gag order from holding press conferences on the courthouse steps like he did after his initial arraignment. But under the terms of the limited gag order, he can still hold press conferences elsewhere or make other public statements about his case, or at least he could. It's hard to imagine that will continue now, after Mr. Stone today posted on Instagram a close-up photo of the judge who's hearing his case. That judge who's involved in all of these other things, right? This is the judge who is about to get her first sentencing recommendation on Paul Manafort. She's the one who revoked Manafort's bail. She is the one who just ruled that Manafort intentionally lied to prosecutors. She is the one who is handling the Russian military intelligence GRU case. She is the one who has been assigned to the Roger Stone case. That judge, Roger Stone, posted an Instagram photo of her today that included a little crosshairs, like a little target in the corner right next to her head. And I'm not showing you the image because if we don't have to, none of us need to be in the business of showing pictures of federal judges with what look like crosshairs next to their heads. But Roger Stone did that today. And after initially posting that image online, Mr. Stone later took it down, and then he reposted it a few minutes later with a closer cut version of the same picture, one that crops out the crosshairs from next to the judge's head. But it's still the same written attack on the judge in the caption to the image. And I don't know if Roger Stone wants to be jailed for threatening the federal judge who was hearing his case, or if he just really wants to be subject to a full gag order, or I don't know what he wants. But apparently, he's going to be the latest fantastic float down this parade of geniuses that we have seen from Russia scandal defendants in court thus far. Really? The judge hearing your case? You sure? Any judge? You sure? Late tonight, just before we got on air, Roger Stone and his attorneys filed this document with the judge in his case, the judge whose picture he posted today with the crosshairs next to her head. I kid you not, this is a real thing. They have actually filed with the real court. This is the formal-looking headline they've put at the top of their submission. Roger J. Stone's Notice of Apology. And then this is the filing. Undersigned counsel with the attached authority of Roger J. Stone hereby apologizes to the court for the improper photograph and comment posted on his Instagram today. Instagram. Mr. Stone recognizes the impropriety and had it removed. And then attached to that from the lawyers is this little legal ditty from Roger Stone himself, with Roger Stone's signature attached. It says, quote, "Please inform the court that the photograph and comment today was improper and should not have been posted. I had no intention of disrespecting the court and humbly apologize," extra space, "to the court for the transgression." Concurrent with this misspelled and apparently hastily dashed off apology to the court, under the headline, "Apology." Concurrent with this, Mr. Stone tonight has apparently dropped the second iteration of his Instagram post. So first he just took down the crosshairs and reposted the thing that he posted again, and then he took that down too. So we will see how this works out. This is not the sort of thing that the federal court system tends to take lightly. But with all the cases related to the Russia scandal, A, it has been a parade of genius. But B, there is a little element of uncertainty and suspense right now as to whether things are going to change from here on out, whether things are going to proceed differently in all of these court cases than what we've seen before. I mean, nobody knows quite what to expect from the new Attorney General, William Barr, who is just starting his new tenure as head of the Justice Department. And incidentally, as the unrecused new overseer of the Mueller investigation. Just to heighten the drama and the suspense, the first few days of his tenure as Attorney General, since he was sworn in Thursday night, have been dominated in the news by revelations from former FBI Acting Director Andrew McCabe. He was Deputy Director of the FBI under James Comey. He became Acting FBI Director once Comey was fired. And Andrew McCabe, of course, is one of a long string of senior intelligence and law enforcement officials who were involved in the initial investigations of Trump and the Trump campaign and potential ties to Russia, who have since been targeted and or fired in an effort to discredit them and destroy their credibility. He's one in a long string of those officials, right? And the list is kind of astonishing. I mean, it's like, you know, James Comey himself, the director of the FBI, Director of National Intelligence, James Clapper, Director of the CIA, John Brennan, Trump's handpicked Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, his handpicked Deputy Attorney General, Rod Rosenstein, the head counterintelligence agent at the FBI, Peter Strzok, the top Russian organized crime expert at the Justice Department, Bruce Orr. They've all come under sustained attack from the president and, honestly, from conservative media and congressional Republicans. And that list, of course, includes Andy McCabe himself, who is now doing interviews over these last few days because his book is out tomorrow, Read It and Weep. What has received the most attention thus far is his contention that senior Justice Department and FBI officials were so disturbed and so concerned about what appeared to be the president's inappropriate relationship with Russia that they considered the full range of options that might be available to them to try to handle that kind of extreme threat to the country. This previously unimaginable possibility that somebody who was an agent of a foreign adversary had become president of the United States. And this, of course, is what has caused the White House and conservative media freak out over Andrew McCabe's book and what he is now publicly describing about his time as acting FBI director after James Comey was fired by the president. And I know we've been marinating in this stuff for a long time, right? When we frogs hopped into this pot together, the water was pleasantly cool. And it's been sort of an interesting but not terribly alarming situation to feel the atmosphere getting cozier and cozier and warmer and warmer. And now what are those bubbles forming at the bottom of the pot and rising to the surface, right? But it is, I mean, just step back from it. It is an amazing snapshot in American history right now to be living through this. To hear the guy who was the acting director of the FBI, a registered Republican with 20 plus years of service at the FBI, the senior official with this pedigree in international organized crime and counterterrorism and national security, now trying to speak for the record, to speak for history, to make the record as clear and as stark as possible so we all as citizens know that the FBI and the Justice Department at the highest levels had reason to worry They were worried enough about what they were seeing with regard to this president in Russia. Literally, they were worried about the threat that the president was an active agent of a hostile foreign country, that they considered whether the vice president and half the cabinet might act to remove that president from office without going through the impeachment process, through the sort of shortcut process to the removal of an unfit president that is spelled out in the 25th Amendment to the Constitution. I mean, they considered whether the president should be surveilled as a potential foreign agent, as he would have been had this been any other investigation into a possible foreign agent infiltrating a sensitive national security position in the United States government. I mean, they had those discussions. Ultimately, they decided that what they could do at least was formally open a counterintelligence investigation into the president potentially being compromised by a foreign power. And the decision was made at the Justice Department that they would appoint a special counsel of unimpeachable integrity to pursue those core questions. And this forever will be the time in American history that you lived through. Congratulations. But what I find fascinating about what Andrew McCabe is telling us now is something that's not just important for us trying to get the history right here. It's not just important in terms of us correctly understanding the origin story of what got the Mueller investigation going and all the rest of it. What I find fascinating about what McCabe is testifying to now is something that directly bears on what is happening right now at the FBI and the Justice Department and in our government. Because what McCabe is now able to describe publicly is the fact that what they set in motion in terms of the special counsel investigation and this counterintelligence investigation into whether Trump was compromised, those things weren't just set in motion the way they were because of the fear of the worst case scenario when it came to Trump and national security. They didn't just do those things because of the unimaginable prospect that the president was an active foreign agent representing some other country. They specifically did those things and did them the way they did them because they were worried that one of the ways that worst case scenario might manifest in the Trump administration at this point in history would be that the intelligence and law enforcement leadership and institutions that were in charge of recognizing and thwarting and exposing this kind of a national security disaster would somehow be dismantled, taken apart, stymied. Right? I mean, think about it just in basic terms. Imagine it as some other country going through this, if that's easier, right? I mean, if a hostile foreign power did play a role in installing somebody at the top of a government, right? Somebody beholden to them that they put in the top leadership job in another country's government. One of the ways that might manifest in terms of that foreign country getting what it wanted is if that leader then moved to shut down all the investigations, moved to shut down all the law enforcement actions, moved to shut down all the counterintelligence stuff that might blow up and expose what had just happened, right? Make sure that foreign country doesn't get caught. Make sure that foreign country doesn't get punished. And make sure their co-conspirators and the compromised leader they installed don't get nailed for what's just happened. You feared that those investigations would be made to go away. We are now a year and a half down the road from that conversation that Andrew McCabe was describing there on 60 Minutes last night. Since that conversation he was describing with the president, of course, a year and a half ago, the president has, in fact, made every effort to try to make the investigations go away, including trying to destroy the careers and the credibility of every senior law enforcement and intelligence official involved in any senior way in the investigation. And now today, with that warning from Andrew McCabe ringing in our ears, today, the Mueller investigation is all of a sudden under new management as a brand new Attorney General takes over. And nobody knows what exactly to expect from William Barr as Attorney General. And whether or not he's the guy who's sent in there to make the investigations go away, like McCabe feared from the beginning. But we do know that William Barr got the job of Attorney General after sending an unsolicited 19-page memo to the White House describing the Mueller investigation as fatally misconceived. And so at this moment, at this sort of pivotal moment, I think it's helpful for framing here that it's President's Day, right? Focus. But also at this pivotal moment, I think there's one element of all of this that is the thing to watch and it has just started happening, and that story's next. Stay with us. So this is something that started to take shape in public the first week of December 2017, December 5th, 2017, which was a Tuesday. And that was a moment that was a little bit of a fraught moment in the federal government. Because just a few days earlier, the previous Friday, Robert Mueller had got himself his first cooperating witness when Trump National Security Advisor Mike Flynn pled guilty to a felony charge and signed a plea deal in which he agreed to cooperate with prosecutors from the special Mueller. That happens on Friday. Then it was the weekend, then Tuesday morning before dawn, a German publication called Handelsblatt, I think that's how you say it. I don't know how to speak German. Handelsblatt, that's my guess. They ran this headline, quote, Mueller's Trump-Russia investigation engulfs Deutsche. Deutsche Bank has received a subpoena from the U.S. Special Counsel investigating possible collusion between President Donald Trump's campaign and Russia. Here was the lead they ran that day. Quote, Deutsche Bank has been served. U.S. investigators are demanding that it provide information on dealings linked to the Trumps, say sources familiar with the matter. The subpoena is part of a probe by Special Counsel Robert Mueller and his team to determine whether the president's campaign was involved in Russian efforts to influence the U.S. election. Quote, it remains unclear whether Mueller requested information on President Trump's own business dealings with Deutsche Bank or on those of people close to him. Deutsche Bank apparently received the subpoena weeks ago. So again, that news broke in the pre-dawn hours here in the U.S. on Tuesday, December 5th, 2017. German publication breaking that news. In Bob Woodward's book, Fear, he says the day that story ran in that German publication, the president called his top Russia lawyer at 7 a.m. Eastern time. Quote, he was furious. The story then spread. It was picked up by Bloomberg and by Reuters and by The Guardian and by the Wall Street Journal. They all did their own reporting to follow up that scoop from Handelsblatt. And the details were all a little different in each of those outlets and each of those stories. But the basic idea was simple. Federal prosecutors had subpoenaed the bank that held hundreds of millions of dollars in loans to President Trump, the bank that somewhat inexplicably had done hundreds of millions of dollars of business with him years after he'd been blackballed at every other major financial institution in the country, a bank that, perhaps coincidentally, was also mired in a huge ongoing scandal over its role in a multi-billion-dollar Russian money laundering scheme. Back in July of 2017, that summer, the president had said that any effort by prosecutors to look into his personal finances or his business finances would be a red line from his perspective, a line that could not be crossed. We later learned, months later, in reporting from the New York Times, that day that German newspaper broke the story of that subpoena and all those other news outlets then subsequently ran their own versions of those stories. December 5th, 2017, we learned later the president not only angrily phoned his Russia lawyer at 7 a.m. that day, he also, according to the New York Times, that day tried to mount an effort for the first time to fire Robert Mueller to end his Russia investigation. Quote, in early December, President Trump, furious over news reports about a new round of subpoenas from the Office of Special Counsel, told advisors in no uncertain terms that Mueller's investigation had to be shut down. The president's anger was fueled by reports that the subpoenas were for obtaining information about his business dealings with Deutsche Bank. The Times cited 8 White House officials, 8, as its sources for that story. And we still don't know why exactly that subpoena, right, that investigative effort, above all else, would be the red line. That would be the thing that caused the president to move in and try to fire Robert Mueller. But by the end of the day, on Tuesday, December 5th, 2017, it's interesting. Most of those stories about that subpoena to Deutsche Bank, most of those stories had been at least partially walked back or at least softened. Maybe there wasn't a subpoena at all, or maybe the subpoena was not about Trump himself. Maybe the subpoena was about people just affiliated with Trump. I mean, if there is a financial story to tell at the heart of this scandal, for a number of reasons, Deutsche Bank feels like the place you might start to try to figure that out. We've never had complete clarity on what happened with those news reports back in December 2017 and the president's reported freak out about that story in particular and why that story ultimately got at least partially here and there walked back a little bit, at least a little softened. Certainly earned vigorous denials from the president and his own lawyers. David Ignatius at the Washington Post, however, he now reports this, quote, "We're entering a new phase of the Trump-Russia investigation in which the president's efforts to contain the probe are failing. Information he tried to suppress about his business and political dealings is emerging, with more to come." Quote, "A Deutsche Bank subpoena would be especially sensitive. Trump was enraged by a December 2017 report that special counsel Robert Mueller had subpoenaed the bank's records about its dealings with Trump. Quote, the red line apparently held then. Trump lawyer Jay Sekulow told Reuters no Deutsche Bank subpoena has been issued or received." According to Ignatius writing now, quote, "One government source speculates that Rod Rosenstein, the Deputy Attorney General, blocked any attempt to compel disclosure of the bank's Trump records to avoid getting himself or Robert Mueller fired." That's one government source speculating. I mean, honestly, we don't know if that subpoena ever was issued, or if it did get walked back somehow, and if so, if it did, by whom. But the new phase of the investigation that David Ignatius is talking about here, where he's saying that the president's efforts to, what did he say, to contain the probe are failing, this new phase of the Trump-Russia investigation he's talking about, it's not now one that's happening through the Justice Department. And therefore, it's not one that could be stopped by anyone in the Justice Department. It's not one that would need to be overseen by the brand new Trump-appointed Attorney General, William Barr, who has just started as the new AG. This new phase of the Trump investigation that reflects all these things that the president really doesn't want anybody to look into, they're not happening through the Justice Department. These things are now happening through Congress, where Democrats are now in charge in the House, and where Democrats in the Financial Services Committee started demanding Deutsche Bank records about Trump last year. Actually, the year before that, they started demanding Trump records from Deutsche Bank. Without subpoena power of their own, the Democrats were never able to get any meaningful response from Deutsche Bank. But now they've got subpoena power, and they're going for it. They are finally following that money trail, and it appears that they are the first ones doing it. We know that the Senate Intelligence Committee didn't do it. The Senate Intelligence Committee said they hope that Robert Mueller's doing it. House Democrats say they don't believe that Robert Mueller's doing it. And we saw that fiasco with that reporting that all got walked back and everybody freaked out about from December 2017. If there is a money trail in this story, the first stepping stone down that trail is Deutsche Bank, to at least ask questions there. Nobody's done that yet. But now they're starting. The Democrats in the House are starting, and apparently this may be the red line for the president. Honestly, it feels more like a red flag to a bull that's already loose in a china shop. But that's happening. That is starting now, and the person who's leading the effort joins us next. California Congresswoman Maxine Waters is now the chair of the Financial Services Committee in the House. Since 2017, she has been calling publicly for an investigation into the president's business dealings, and specifically whether there could be any connection between his huge outstanding loans and his complicated business history with Deutsche Bank and Deutsche Bank's involvement in a multi-billion-dollar Russian money laundering scheme. The president himself has called any investigation of his personal or business finances a red line that special counsel Robert Mueller should not and cannot cross. But Robert Mueller is not Chairwoman Maxine Waters, and Congress is a co-equal branch of government, and she now has subpoena power as a committee chair. Along with her counterpart on the House Intelligence Committee, Congressman Adam Schiff, Congresswoman Waters is now pursuing this financial investigation that she has long called for. Joining us now is Congresswoman Maxine Waters, Democrat of California, chair of the Financial Services Committee. Chairwoman Waters, thank you so much for being here tonight. It's really nice to have you here.
She's cutting out.
Oh, no.
Yes.
Can you hear me, Madam Chair?
Not that well.
Uh-oh. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to take a quick break. I'm going to send a bunch of elves over to you to fix the audio, and then we'll be back with you in just a moment. We will fix this technical problem. We'll be right back with Maxine Waters right after this. It's live TV, sorry. Let's try one more time. The elves have been dispatched. Democratic Congresswoman Maxine Waters, chair of the Financial Services Committee in the House. We believe we have fixed our technical gremlins. Madam Chair, can you hear me?
Barely.
Oh, well, I'll talk loud. We'll hope we work this out.
I don't know what's happening.
Oh, dear. Well, let me try this. Madam Chair, you've been asking for documents and testimony from Deutsche Bank as it pertains to President Trump, basically since he was sworn in. What are you interested in here? What is it that you're investigating there?
Rachel, would you repeat that one more time?
Sure, we'll give it one more try. Why is it that you have been asking for documents and testimony from Deutsche Bank, basically since President Trump was sworn in? What do you want to investigate there?
Well, as you know, we have tried to get information from Deutsche Bank. We've tried to get Henslin, who was the chair of the committee, to hold investigations. We've tried to get information from Mnuchin.
I am going to call an audible here and say that we should bring the chairwoman back when we can fix this problem, because it's unfair to her to have her unable to hear me and obviously unable to hear herself as she is speaking. So I apologize on behalf of all of our technical gremlins who are not able to be aided in the way they should have been. We will fix this and we will have Chairwoman Maxine Waters back as soon as we can get this sorted. I will tell you, while I was waiting for her to try to get her audio fixed, CNN and Reuters both reported that Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein is going to leave the Justice Department in mid-March. So I do have that bit of news for you that has broken since we have been trying to sort this out. NBC has not confirmed this reporting at this point, but Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein had been expected to leave the department when the new Attorney General, William Barr, was sworn in. Now CNN and Reuters reporting that that is scheduled for about a month from now in mid-March. All right, we'll be right back. Stay with us. They laid it all out in a PowerPoint presentation. Today was the day that state investigators laid out in North Carolina what happened to that bizarre North Carolina congressional race in November that still hasn't been decided. It's the race that appears to have been botched by a big criminal fraud scheme. In North Carolina, the state elections board today announced their findings from their investigation. They said they found evidence of a coordinated, unlawful, and substantially resourced absentee ballot scheme. Investigators said a contractor named McRae Dallas, who was hired by the Republican candidate in this race, he paid people to request batches of absentee ballots in that North Carolina district, and then those people were paid to go door to door to collect those ballots. And that scheme is illegal in North Carolina. And the way it worked in this race was not just illegal as a technicality. Today, in their PowerPoint presentation, they finally spelled out how that scheme was apparently used to invent votes in this election. Certainly with the possibility that they invented enough votes to swing this election to the Republican candidate. One of the people who the Republican contractor paid to carry out this unlawful ballot scheme gave live testimony at the hearing today. She actually happens to be the guy's former stepdaughter. She said McRae Dallas coached her even on what she should say today at today's hearing. He gave her this little fortune cookie-sized scrap of paper telling her what to say. It tells her essentially that she should testify that she had done nothing wrong and she should plead the fifth. She did not follow his instructions on that little piece of paper. Instead, she testified about what she described as his scheme, where workers would forge signatures and fill in votes. She says she improperly handled dozens of ballots in the 9th District herself, and she says she was just one person on a team of people who was wrapped up in this effort. Again, the guy she was working for, McRae Dallas, he was there at the hearing today, but he declined to testify unless the state board granted him immunity. The board did not grant him immunity, and then that was pretty much the end of day one. The hearing will continue, but this is an election that was won by 905 votes. I mean, it's tempting just to make this about the math, right? Whether the result was based on wrongfully cast ballots or rightfully cast ballots that were trashed intentionally for the benefit of one candidate. But what this North Carolina board is being asked to decide is whether the election itself was tainted by what state investigators, again, are calling a coordinated, unlawful, and substantially resourced scheme. When the hearings conclude, the appointed state board will take a vote either to certify the results from November, which would hand the Republican the seat, or they could order a do-over, a fresh election, have voters just pick a new winner in a new election. taking any action will require at least one Republican or two Democrats to break party lines. If they can't do that, they can't come to one of those two conclusions, this could ultimately go to Congress, where the House itself has the power to order a new election in order to figure out which new member from that district will be seated in the House. I mean, so that's question number one. How does this race get decided, when and by whom? But, I mean, here's my other question. Allegations of election fraud about this one Republican political operative, this guy McCrae Dowless, have circulated in North Carolina for years. State investigators are talking openly about the unlawful activity that this scheme represents. So why is this not being decided in a courtroom right now with the prosecutors and a jury? Why is this still just an election board matter? Joining us now from Raleigh, North Carolina is Eli Portillo, politics and government reporter for the Charlotte Observer. He was at the hearing today. Mr. Portillo, it's good to have you with us. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So today was this long first day of hearings. As I understand it, there's going to be further proceedings as the state elections board tries to figure this out. What do you think was the most substantive thing that we learned today?
There were a few things that we've learned today that were rumored or reported in the media for a while, but now we know that state investigators have come to similar conclusions. For example, multiple voters have told us that people came and collected ballots from them. We've also heard from people in media reports that they were paid by McCrae Dowless, the political operative, to go out and get ballots. Now we know that state investigators verified those facts, they verified those allegations, and they're saying that, yes, this did in fact happen, and this has been going on for a while, and this could have benefited the Harris campaign. Also, the state told us today that there were allegations and evidence of witness tampering after the investigation started. McCrae Dowless allegedly gathered the people he'd been paying to collect ballots at his house once the investigation kicked off, and according to one witness, told them, if we all stick together, we'll be okay because they don't have anything on us. So those allegations are new and cast doubt on how long this has been going on after the investigation started, not just before and during the election.
What was striking to me, just watching the hearing today and reading people's live blogs of the hearing today as y'all were covering it, what struck me was that I think from the outside in particular, looking in on this race in North Carolina, a lot of this has felt like process crimes. Like in some states, it's not necessarily illegal to collect people's ballots and bundle them and bring them in. Like it all sort of seemed like these are technical violations. What was striking to me was hearing one of these people who was working as part of the scheme to say, yeah, I filled in the votes. I actually cast the votes, like checked off the box or whatever it was for all the Republican candidates where people had left these things blank. Is this the first direct evidence that we've had, the first direct testimony that we've had, that this scheme wasn't just to sort of undermine the way things are supposed to work, it was in fact to throw the election to a Republican candidate?
Well, it was the first time we've heard someone say directly, yes, I filled in a ballot that wasn't mine. I voted on a ballot that didn't belong to me. And you're right, that is in a different category than the process crime. In North Carolina, it's illegal to collect ballots. As you said, in some states, that's perfectly legal. The Mark Harris lawyers, though, they did try to make a distinction. They asked the witness, did you ever fill in a vote for Mark Harris? And the witness said no, it was basically the down ballot and local races that were left blank that they filled in for Republicans. So the Harris campaign is trying to draw a distinction and say, well, even if that happened, it still couldn't affect the outcome because it was Republicans, but in the down ballot local races. So that was a point of contention today.
Fascinating. Eli Portillo, Charlotte Observer, politics and government reporter. This is, I know, being right in the middle of this is pretty exciting. It's such a bizarre case. Thanks for helping us understand tonight.
Thank you.
All right, we'll be right back. Stay with us. Happy President's Day. This is one of those holidays for which there isn't a generally accepted way you're supposed to celebrate. If you were in the Northeast, I know this was a particularly good President's Day to go ice fishing. However, if that's not your thing, I don't really have any other recommendations. That said, this year for President's Day, thousands of Americans did all celebrate the same way, which is that they turned out and protested the so-called national emergency that President Trump declared last Friday in order to try to build a wall on the southern border without money from Congress. President's Day protests all across the country today. And it's interesting, they were all pulled together. Footage from Oakland, California. This is more than 200 people in formation spelling out the word wall with a blue X through it. That is good design. Cambridge, Massachusetts, they had a brass band and a sing-along. They also had their brand new Congresswoman, Ayanna Pressley, cheering them on. In Fort Collins, Colorado, people were out despite balmy temperatures of 9 degrees. In Detroit, Michigan, they kept warm by dressing up as the Statue of Liberty and that big Trump baby head thing. This was Glens Falls, New York, in the snow today.
Make tacos! Make tacos!
Who among us would argue with make tacos, not walls? Who among us? There were protests in good weather today, too, in Miami, Florida. This is footage from Miami. Also, Yolo County, California. I should tell you, as we head into the late night hours tonight, there are actually still more of these still happening tonight and ongoing. And since the emergency declaration, there's been a lot of attention, and rightfully so, on the dozens of lawsuits that have been piling up at the courthouse door to try to block the emergency declaration from the president. But you can't always tell in advance which one of these is going to apply. But this is turning out to be one of the Trump administration scandals that has a real citizen participation element to it, which can be a more